Test. All right.
Alrighty, today we have an exciting speech. Today, Garrett McMan has been to the future and did not want to come back. So it will be very exciting to hear why he does not.
All right. So my name is Garrett McMan. I've been in information security in various shapes and forms now for about 15 years. I've done a lot of technical work. I've done leadership. I've done consulting. But have a bunch of letters behind my name that I don't usually use. Master's degree, and father of twin girls who tried to get them dressed up like time travelers, but 3-year-olds do not cooperate when you want them to. So, but I want to kind of give a little bit of background as to how this talk came about. Was in when I started this, my current position, now previous position, the company I was working for was investing in big data as a solution for the business, which gave security really a chance to say, hey, here is a technology that we have. How can we start to use this? And this is kind of some of the things that I learned along the way of research into the subject. So, getting into it, I want to kind of start out talking about some definitions, in particular those things that tend to be buzzwords and used by vendors, and making sure that we're talking about the same thing, in particular in where we're going into this topic specifically. Talk about a little bit of history, is what's happened to the past of what has gotten us to this point, and really where some of the things I think that we can apply this technology in the future, as well as what do we need to do to prepare to take the next step into big data as information security professionals. So, first one, threat intelligence. We can use this term in a lot of different ways. If you saw some of the talks that Taz has been giving over the last few days, she's talked about several different ones. But for this talk specifically, we're thinking about is taking information and turning it into data, and more specifically talking about data that can be processed. So in this, a lot of people think threat intelligence, right? I'm going to go out and I'm going to get this threat feed and I'm going to pull it down and it's going to do something magically for me, and it really isn't the case, right? So when we take that information that's coming to us, turning it into data, say, let's put it into our SIM, now start writing correlation rules around that data, we have something that's actionable that we can use, and that's where I refer to as threat intelligence here. Actionable threat intelligence, strategic threat intelligence is something entirely different, but we're talking about actionable stuff here. So, indicators of compromise, which is kind of the byproduct of threat intelligence. So this is data that becomes acquired from previous compromises or compromise attempts. And we talk about it a lot in the form of static indicators. So IP addresses, URLs, hash values, things like that. But there's the other side that we don't talk about a lot or haven't really in recent years, and that's behavioral threat intelligence. So think of this in a way where potentially we can use static indicators, like Yara is a behavioral sort of taking static indicators and say if-then type statements. Or more so, let's say execution of malware from the recycle bin, right? That is a behavior that's probably not good, right? And if we saw that, we would react to it if we were in a SOC, right? So, threat hunting. I think this is one where it's the buzzword is out there. The vendors pick up on it. Others have picked up on it. But it isn't one where it's been really defined. It can mean really a lot of different things. Realistically, just having, say, an alert pop up on the SIM could be a form of threat hunting. But to me, when we talk about it, is really saying, here, now we have IOCs, static, behavioral, whatever they might be. Let's use those to go see what is sitting out there on my environment, or not just now, but what might have happened in the past if this is, say, the new whiz-bang attack that comes out that everyone's talking about. And generally what I like to think about this is saying this is proactive activity, not necessarily waiting for that alert to pop up, but I'm taking this information, I'm going through and I'm searching my logs or looking or using other tools that are already doing this for me. So, behavioral analytics. And this to me is a use of an algorithm that's looking for a behavior of an entity. So we use it a lot in user behavior analytics, I think is the biggest one that you'll hear it from. But it's not just users. We think about it as, say, an IP address, a host name. It can be a person, which is, can be extremely useful. But we're talking about something that's really performed by a machine here, right? In predictive analytics is really saying, okay, if I know something and that something changes, I can predict with some certainty that something has happened when that data set has changed. And machine learning is my favorite one from a buzzword term that really I think it's used quite often. And the way that I see it used is saying, hey, I've got a bunch of data, I throw it up into the cloud, and I've got this agent that sits out here, and all it does is go look up in the cloud and see if that bad stuff is there, which is really just comparing what you have here locally to something that's sitting in the cloud. That's not really machine learning. Machine learning would say, I have all this bad stuff in the cloud, I have all this good stuff as well. As we create a mathematical model that can start to find that bad stuff that's sitting there and determine what the bad stuff is, when I take new data and integrate it into that cloud data platform, the machine learning algorithm is predicting accurately that this is bad data versus being good data. Right? So, any questions on those? All right, so I want to get into some history, and really I'll start, I think, where my information security career started from when I got into things, really just saying, here are some of the things that really existed, right? Antivirus, firewalls, anti-spam to some extent was pretty readily available as a tool set. It would say that there was a lot of thinking like, hey, this is enough. Antivirus is going to detect what I want. I'm using a firewall. I'm only allowing port 80 into my web server. I'm good, right? So as we move along, really kind of taking a look and saying, well, I'm now allowing port 80 into my firewall, but there's some good stuff flowing in there. There's some bad stuff flowing in there. I want to see the bad stuff. So we start to introduce things like intrusion detection that says, based on this signature and this pattern of activity, something bad is happening, right? So now we get to a point where we say, okay, here's some bad things happening. They're attacking these vulnerabilities. Maybe I can proactively go out and fix those vulnerabilities. So we come up with this thing called vulnerability scanners that do just that, right? So take it a step further. We start to see things that were worm-like activity. So the code red, SQL Slammer. And IDS was really saying, hey, this stuff is hitting me and it's coming into my network. My IDS is picking it up. Why don't I just take this IDS and make it into a protection mechanism? So we move into this mind thought that, hey, we can take all this stuff, put in our IDS, now we have prevention, we're good, nothing bad is going to ever happen to us. So then we get to the point where we start to realize there's some other things, like say this ASA worm, where it was introduced into the internal network, took advantage of many vulnerabilities on the endpoint, which is where generally we weren't focusing on vulnerability management and we weren't patching. So we decided, well, you know what, to fix this, we got to start patching. And we start seeing things come out and tools that come out to help us do this. WSUS, SSCM now more currently from the Windows side. That if we actually start to patch this stuff, we don't have to worry about the worms hitting our network, right? As part of that, we also kind of realized that we really should be filtering these ports, like Windows file sharing in particular. SMTP worms become popular around this time, IRC, and we start to think about really how do we filter this stuff that's heading out of our network. So the firewall now becomes, instead of filtering just the traffic that's coming into those web servers, by now need to start enforcing that filtering outbound. We start also, thinking like, hey, how do we utilize the proxy server as well, right? Typically up to this point, it was seen from, being an admin of proxy services at around this time. Realistically, they were being used as an HR tool, right? Don't let the company go out and see porn. Don't let them go see gun sites, blah, 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 right? We don't really start thinking about how do we utilize this technology to help protect us, and how do we stop people from potentially going to the more malicious sites that might be out there. Talking to a little bit more into the future, we start to hear about a thing called Stuxnet, right? Along with that came a lot of talk about 0 days. Antivirus is not effective. All these other tools people start talking about are really dead technologies, right? And I think there's some truth to that. So they say, let's take the advanced malware tools. We're going to take these executables. We're going to run them through a virtual machine and see what happens when that executable runs. And based on that, we can determine if something is good or bad, right? So, again, going back to 0 days, antivirus, not very effective. Advanced malware is doing some good stuff. Probably not as widely deployed as it could be. And we start looking at other solutions, right? So let's whitelist executables. What should only allow, what should be allowed to run. And the flip side of that, same sort of theory, is virtualization. I'm going to let anything run within the virtual machine for, say, my web browser, but as soon as I close that web browser, that virtual machine wipes away, and all the bad stuff has gone with it. Right? So we got all this stuff in place. Realistically, at this point, we think we should be good. There's a lot of stuff that's out there detecting all this stuff or trying to protect us, and we still have, just the stuff or all that's on top of it from a day-to-day operational perspective that we have to deal with, right? So tuning all these tools, making sure that they're working. So thinking about bringing in red teams and things like that. Third-party patch management, like how are we patching Flash and Java, in particular, right? These become really huge problems. Spam through email and phishing attempts. Like this is just an ongoing problem, and it really becomes the whack-a-mole type of situation. And really saying, hey, you know what? Our users are the cause of all of this. We should start educating them a little bit. Don't click on the links. Don't open up these crazy attachments. If you don't do business with the bank who's asking for your credentials, you probably shouldn't give them to that bank, right? So, now, where we are realistically is there's been such a change in the way that the network has worked. Take most of that stuff and just toss it out the window, because we're talking about where before, large set of users, your data was sitting within the four walls of a data center or something like that. Today we don't have that, right? We have people that want to bring their own devices. We have mobile computing and we have cloud, right? So think about it from the users where you're at. If we have, someone using their personal cell phone to access email and Office 365, how can I protect myself from that, right? I think there's some good solutions out there. They aren't really fully, deployed, but containerization being one of them, in mobile particularly, digital rights management being some others, but really outside of the scope of what I want to talk about, just really saying, hey, we've got all this stuff that we thought was protecting us. The world has changed. We have to rethink what we're doing at this point. So, the general theory has become over time that protection, the static type of devices like antivirus, like firewalls, are going to help us. They're still needed. They're still necessary. But the only way that we're really going to be able to stop the bad guy is going through the process of detection and response, right? So, assuming the theory is that if we can detect and respond quick enough, that we've stopped whatever the breach is or whatever the bad thing is going to happen. Over the process of this, what we've done is taken a lot of those technologies and came up with this thing called SIM, right? So we're going to take all that data, we're going to toss it into a bunch of storage, and turn on some correlation rules, and some magic is going to happen, right? How many people actually have a SIM? And has that actually helped you in realistically saying through all my data and it's going to magically come out and tell you everything the world's been fixed? Right. So generally, sort of, right? So it's a challenge in deploying these devices that are supposed to be helping us, and taking in, kind of saying, I think the problems around SIM and the problems in developing SIM can be and has been its own talk over time. But just even saying taking the best practice of SIM today, which is saying take your use cases, develop them, and utilize those use cases to only bring in the data that you want, and create the alerts that you want and be able to respond to those alerts you want, still creates this massive set of data. As we get into it, we start saying, oh, wait, I have to respond, so I didn't really need the DNS logs to do detection, but I do need them for response. So they're going into the SIM because we don't really have any place else to store them, right? At least in most companies. In, fast solution, you have something other syslog repository, Splunk, something else holding all of this massive data set, right? Excuse me. So over the course of this, we've really just created ourselves this giant problem, right? Of having all this data sitting there. It's expensive to store in SIM. We have vulnerability information. It's difficult to get those things really remediated, right? Anyone that's ran a vulnerability management program knows what this is like. We have a ton of threat intelligence data that's flowing at us. So we have a big problem, which is really, to me, a big solution, right? So when we talk about all of this coming in and taking some of the definitions that we had talked about, predictive analytics, behavioral analysis, and machine learning, with all the data that we've collected for ourselves over the years, we can start applying some big data analysis techniques to help us solve the problem, right? So, as I mentioned, really, when I had started this research into this, it was to really the business asking for big data to support their problems. So, the business is actually infinitely ahead of security when we start talking about these things, because they've come up and said, hey, I think I've got all this information. It can help me make real business decisions. So let's start applying that now to information security specifically. So these are some of the things that are really happening today. And we talk about in detection and threat hunting specifically, when we can just do simple relationship connection of various different pieces of data, it can really help us in turning it into a visualized map that looks something like that up there, right? So this IP address is talking to this other IP address who shares this same domain name, and this user does this, and as you can start to see that in a visualized shape, you start to realize how, how connected some of these events that we have going on actually are, right? So we can kind of see this as well, the visualization up here, and I know some of these are kind of difficult to read, is really looking at offense data from QRadar SIM and saying, well, hey, you know what? Some of these offenses are actually connected together. So as I'm an analyst starting to look at this information, I can start to look at these as one big thing as opposed to several little things that are happening along the chain of this attack. That allows me to say, hey, I got a big problem. Let me respond to that appropriately versus say, oh, wait, commodity malware, no problem, wiping that machine. But we forgot, oh, they laterally moved now to the domain controller, but hey, that looks connected, so holy crap, call my incident response guys, right? So, the other part of this too is really just looking at those things that are statistical outliers. So, giving an example, user behavior, right? I think this is a perfect way to look at this. So, as a user, normal user in the course of business tends to do the same things day in and day out, right? If you think about what you do, and apply it to the business users as well, it's the same sort of thing, right? I come in, check my email, probably spend some time doing that. I go to a meeting, check more email, go to a meeting, don't really do any real work until, 4 o'clock, but, hey, that's generally the day of what actual real users are doing, right? So when they start to move away from that pattern, you can kind of think, hey, that user usually is not traveling to France and connecting to the VPN. I have a problem here I might want to go look at, right? So just taking that data, visualizing it, using some of the tools that big data use, I think is extremely helpful for this use case. Take it a step further, as I just said, vulnerability management, right? It's a very difficult thing to do and do successfully. You're fighting an ever-changing battle, right? Vulnerabilities happen, they come out monthly, Microsoft Tuesday, which is generally, releasing vulnerabilities for various under vendors at the same time. We battle with the network teams and server teams to get time to actually fix and remediate these things, in which, they come back and say, why am I doing this, right? And it's something we have to explain to them and say, well, if you don't fix this, something might happen, right? So put yourself in that role, right? I'm spending a lot of time fixing something that might happen instead of, going out and helping, say, a user address their problem that's stopping them from completing their business, right? Let's say we can take this information, we take information that we have, that we've already collected, right? We have attack data from our IPS devices, whatever else it might be, come from the SIM. We generally have a risk registry of things that are happening from a risk perspective. We have information about the vulnerabilities themselves. We have our threat intelligence. Hopefully we have information about the assets themselves, which is generally one of the biggest challenges in vulnerability management, but hey, hopefully we do at this point. We have good data classification, all of our other logs, all of our other flows. Let's take this and say, realistically, here's this vulnerability. I have risk records open because there's other issues going on systemically that aren't necessarily related to the vulnerability, maybe related to the fact that it's in the wrong segment in our network, for example. You now start to take some of this, pull it all together, and say, what, this server is sitting in our core, which is a violation of our policy. It's vulnerable to these 5 critical things that are actually being attacked at our organization, right? So now my story, going back to those people that are supposed to be helping us resolve these, changes. It isn't just, hey, you're fixing this because something might happen. You're fixing this because it is actually happening now, and we have other problems that could cause this to be much greater if this vulnerability was actually exploited. So predictions, and I think that this is one where it's, becomes almost science fiction, right? And we haven't really thought about how to utilize this in information security. But the business has, right? So in particular, I think the story that you generally hear is that we have all of this data. If I change my marketing strategy, can I predict how effective it's going to be, right? I think that's something that the business people have solved using big data for those that have invested in the type of technology. So apply it to us, right? Can we now start using and predict our own metrics? Meaning, if we, mean time for us to respond and resolve an incident is X. If we can, say, add an additional analyst to that picture, does that become less? In theory it should, but we now have data to prove that, right? We also realistically probably say, if we don't add that analyst, how much data are we losing at that point? Because I think we have enough data to show, hey, we're this good, we could be this better, and that means that we are, preventing this much of information leaving, right? And going back to the other slides, knowing that we have things like information about that data, we can probably take it a step further and say, not just are we losing data, but we're losing our critical data, right? So I think the other one that's been in my head that I think can probably really be done today, if we really put our minds to it using the technologies that are out there available to us, is predicting those users that are most likely to fall for a phishing or social engineering attack, right? So, take someone using Comic Sans font in purple. That's probably like right up there at my list. Anyone in sales, anyone in developers, those type of people we think are probably going to be kind of vulnerable, right? They tend to have, from a sales perspective, they're saying, hey, I just want to sell and get something done. Developers are constantly saying, I need administrative rights, right? And they're selling all kinds of crazy tools, have code on their machines generally that they're running through, which is really, think about it, IP of the company, of some future product or service or something, right? So taking it now a step further, putting it into machine learning and modeling, the problem that happens and comes up as anyone that's been in this industry for a while is the budget for information security generally is not growing. It's generally not growing for information technology. It's generally, in a lot of cases, not growing at all across the board, right? So we get to a point where it becomes time to say, I need to figure out how to reduce my budget. If I can start creating models based on all the data that we've been talking about, I can start saying, well, what if I take this out, or this protection mechanism out? How does my risk change, right? So that becomes very valuable to really, help take to upper management and say, what, I can't find anything that we can really remove, but maybe if we tweak this a little bit, we're pretty good, and we're going to save about $100,000 by doing that. That's really helping someone make a business decision, even if that business decision is based around information technology, right? So, thinking about it as well, right? Hey, sales guy is coming to sell you this new box with all these fancy blinking lights. If I can put that in my network as a POC and start gathering data, I can probably use that same model to now predict, do I need that new fancy blinking light box to help me out or not, And this is kind of one of the things that I came to the conclusion of just looking at this and saying, hey, in theory, I think a lot of this stuff can be done if we took the effort to utilize the technology, finding the right people that can and know how to use the technology to create these algorithms, create the applications and those things that we need to basically apply all of those use cases, right? I think they're completely doable, but we need smart people to do it. So on the flip side of this, as being a manager of the department that was to take this over, I had to go out and find someone who knew how to use this technology. Not easy. There are not a lot of people that know about the big data type of technologies and know about security. And the few that do want Silicon Valley money, right? Being in Michigan, I didn't have a Silicon Valley budget, right? So, starting to, I think what thankfully happened is, we kind of realized that, this, technology really is, a future need based on the fact that we need to fix some other systemic problems first. So let's put this on the back burner, and start to think about it that really what we needed to do was find someone who understood either security really well and could be taught about big data, or find someone who understood big data really well and be taught about security. So at this point, I kind of start doing some research into, what's being taught out there, right? So I found a study done by Ponymon about the top 5 universities for InfoSec degrees. So I know there's 6 on the slide, which is because the number 4 was tied. So argue how you may want, there may be 4 or 5 or 6. But really looking into this, some of these schools tend to stand out as you would think that they are, technology universities. They have good programs, but looking at their academic courses that were offered, there were very few that offered anything in the security programs around big data, right? Now, some of the things that aren't included in here, right? You go to Stanford, it's a research university. They're really doing stuff in big data. You could research the crap out of InfoSec and big data if you wanted to, and find people there that are going to help you learn that, right? But for most of us, we're going to a university like this to say, hey, I want to go into information security. Thinking about this, realistically, I go into a program today. In 4 years from now, we're going to be using big data whether we really want to or not, right? These kids should be coming out of school in 4 years and have some idea of what big data is. And the problem is we're just not really seeing that. So the only one on this list that I really found that did have it included in their program was Purdue, but it was in their master's program. And basically some of the research that Purdue was doing outside of really the academic programs themselves. So, I took it a little bit further and said, hey, let's look locally. So we went out and looked at the NSA Center of Excellence and pulled up some of the schools that were in Michigan that have information security programs. One of these is a school that I've attended. In another one, I think has a very good information security program. I personally hired several people out of that school that have been fantastic, right? But there is really nothing in any of these schools. Eastern has one intro class, is what I have found. Ferris has it in their master's program, but it's based more around business intelligence and not specific to security. Right? So, being in information security, I think we tend to have to teach ourselves a lot, right? I hear, and I'll say this a lot, right? I think the best information security people are those that have had experience in other areas of IT before they go into InfoSec. Where I know something about server administration, I know something about network administration, I really know how Windows works when something goes right, because what we look at is what happens when something goes wrong, right? So because of that, we do kind of have to have a wide body of knowledge and tend to teach ourselves the InfoSec piece on top of that knowledge that we've been trained for. So I wanted to throw out a few things that I did find for kind of the continuing education if you want to go learn more about big data. And Cloudera and Hortonworks are the two, to me, I think, big players in this area. They both offer training. I can't say if it's free or not. They didn't, the website really didn't discover that as much, but I'm assuming not. Although Cloudera offers a image of their software that you can go download for free. I think there, there's restrictions on what you can and cannot do with it. You probably can't run an enterprise on their free ISO, but it is available, right? The other option, and one of the ways that I had kind of learned and started teaching myself, is there's a number of classes on Coursera, which is kind of a free sharing of information ran by universities. So it's out there if you want to go find it. And Cloudera is free. Right? So, and lastly, what I wanted to kind of share is just talking about, and by no way do I endorse anybody on this list, but these are some of the vendors that I had personally looked at and can say that they are investing in doing things that I call big data solutions. And use, when we talk about machine learning, they actually do it well. So if you want to or are looking to check this out in your industry, and here's a few ways or a few names to start. I will say my opinion on this is there are some people that are doing some good work, but there hasn't been a solution that's close to being complete, right? Could I take some of this and put it in environment and get some really quick and good gains? Absolutely. But take a company like Topspin, who is actually a I forget the actual term we're using, but really it's kind of like putting out a bunch of honeypots on your network, but at the same time they're collecting information about what's happening on the network and putting it through algorithms and machine learning and such, right? So they've changed from what they were originally doing to something entirely different, which, keep that in mind because we have young companies that are using the buzzwords to sell their product, that you want to make sure that you're looking at strategically what are they doing in the future and where are they going with the technology. Yeah. So, and with that, as my Twitter and LinkedIn, generally the best ways to get a hold of me. I know there's quite a bit of time left. Does anyone have any questions? I'm sorry, I can't. Yeah. No, I have not. I have not. There would probably people that are a lot smarter than me competing in those. I have no idea. I couldn't tell you anything about the math behind any of this. But that's why I think the people that can are demanding, $250,000 a year, right? So on the low end. Anyone else? I think it's a little bit of both, right? Think about it from SIM today. when we have, I think that user that's sitting down in front of that SIM, responding to the alerts or whatever they may be doing, can have some knowledge of how the mechanism that created that alert works, can make a lot better decisions on how to handle that alert, right? So I think that there's at least some basic knowledge of understanding what we mean when we say a MapReduce job, and what type of data we're collecting and how the tools work from that perspective. But I went back and said, we have vendors that are using this technology. From what, again, just my opinion, what I've found in a lot of cases is some of them really have the math down great, but the visualization sucks, right? So if I have great visualization, I can set it in front of an analyst, and they're going to be able to pick that apart and I think make decent decisions. But until we get both of those things working together, you need some sort of, I think, someone with that data science background, or at least a basic understanding of it. Right? So, and keep in mind, some of the big financial institutions are really doing this. I think they do it more on the fraud side. But if you look at what they do, I don't think they're really using off-the-shelf programs. They're going out and finding someone who's implementing these sorts of things for them. Right? So if you wanted to go implement this today, you're really stuck and saying, hey, I can use this technology, see where it's going, or I'm going out and find someone who can take the technology and make the applications on top of it for myself. I think, so these are just ones that come up to my mind, right? I think that there are infinite solutions out there to use the technology. And realistically saying is that I don't think that we have found the people with both skill sets to come together and figure that out, right? I mean, these are things that, just like I said, they really popped into my mind, like, hey, when I'm learning about this, maybe I can do this, right? The ink is the vendors are selling it is they're targeting it more as user behavior analytics and threat hunting, but I don't think enough thought has gone into the predictive part to really take that and turn it into something that becomes useful in making real business decisions. Because, well, one, we're pretty bad at that in information security and IT to begin with, so you have to figure out ways to do that. So. Yeah, no problem. So you just inherited all the problems that I've been talking about, so by all means. Think of it another way. One of the things that I did notice, looking at some of these universities and the programs that they offer, and Chris had mentioned this a bit, is they offer a ton of classes in forensics right now, which is great because it's a field where we really, really need people. But if we can start capturing, say, the live forensic data that these incident response people start to capture after the fact, before as it's ongoing, and store it into big data, which is meant to be cheap and in storage and compute, that forensic field of looking at what happened in the past changes dramatically, right? Because now all I'm doing is running a query against the data I already have collected, or realistically I've created models that know how to do this and have learned about the bad stuff already, and it's just presented to me right away, right? So that's a more realistic, probably, application in the near future. I'm sorry, you had your hand up earlier too. Okay. Right. hmm hmm Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And those that are in that situation as students or instructors that are sitting in the room, I mean, from a student perspective, you need to go back to your administration and your instructors and say, you know what? I see this as a problem. Why am I not being taught about this, right? And the same with those people that are instructing. Let's start pulling this into the classes that you're building and creating, right? And it's important.
As an instructor, one of the problems we face right now is students don't want to take a single credit hour, not one credit hour, more than state mandated.
So that
I think that associate degree level,
right.
state says it's an associate degree level, 6 credit hours. And my administration, after you put 2 credit hours on my degree to get that.
So when that same person,
And new things, if I can add something new, someone else is going to help.
so have your administration come talk to me or right, yeah. So come talk to me or Chris or other people like us that are managers of information security programs, because we're going to tell that same person, you're creating a bunch of people that are unhireable, right? So that person is also going to quickly find that out when they're going to be going back to their 4-year degree in some place where they can really get real skill set, right? So I know it's not saying it's an instructor problem to fix, but it's an administration problem to fix. And you have really I think the inroads to start having those conversations with the business people that can help you out.